we were created by God, universe, source, whatever, someone wants to categorize that as. There was it was not a mistake, right? We are not an aberration. We are here for a reason. We are a part of this symphony.
Welcome to The King Within, a podcast for men who seem to have it all, yet feel like they're losing what matters most. I'm Mike Salemi and I've been there. Successful on paper but disconnected on the inside. This isn't about grinding harder. It's about mastering your emotions, leading with calm strength, and rebuilding trust at home. Each week we dive into real stories and tools for becoming the man your family runs towards, not away from. Because you didn't build this life to lose yourself in it. This is The King Within. Let's do the work. Today's guest is someone who's redefined how I think about business, success, and self-love. Ani Manian is the founder of Scale with Psychology. He's advised over 50 executive teams, helped dozens of companies scale from 1 million to 100 million plus in revenue, and his work has contributed to more than 2 billion in combined company exits. In this conversation, we explore his core idea of getting paid to exist, what that really means, and why constraint, not hustle, is the doorway to freedom. You'll hear why subtraction scales faster than addition, how to raise your floor instead of chasing new ceilings, and the mindset shift that turns work back into play. If you've ever felt stretched between ambition and peace, this one's going to land. Follow the show and share it with a friend who's ready to build smarter, not harder. Let's dive in. So funny just being at your place with Lee. One of the first things I said to you was, man, if Lauren was here, she would feel so seen.
Yeah.
Because as I looked in the closet, it's like supplement heaven. Or
And that's not even there's more. Actually, I ran out of space, and then we had to take cupboards in the kitchen and repurpose them into supplement storage. And then in the bathroom, underneath the sink, there's an auxiliary, spillover section.
Is that always been your thing, or just one of your?
Yeah, I mean, not to the same levels of excessiveness, but progressively, it's an accumulative process. Yeah, I've been kind of obsessed with anything that seems like a tool to move the physical, mental, emotional, energetic state into one that's more conducive to peak life. And so the peptides were a recent foray. Because with a lot of this stuff, like with peptides, I had all this, resistance with do I really want to jab myself with? Because I hate needles.
Oh shit! You would never have thought.
I mean,
Ani gave me some NAD and another one for the sinuses. Yeah, you're a pro, bro.
Yeah, and I wasn't a few weeks ago. So.
A few weeks ago,
yeah. Yeah, because I had BPC 157 in my fridge for 2 years. And I had a couple of other things that they were just in the fridge. And there was a part of me that was just not ready to, jump into that. And I started with BPC, which was great.
For the tendons and ligaments and that sort of stuff?
Well, it depends on how you use it, but it can be pretty much systemic repair. It stands for body protection compound.
Oh.
It's endogenously produced in the intestines. So it's really good for gut health. But it also repairs, other tissue systems. And so it was like a like all things, first it was gradual, and then it was now I'm, playing with 5 different things. The thymosin one is interesting because I, for last 6 months, every time I get on a plane, I'll come down with something. Okay, I want to really play with ramping up my immune system. And so...
Before leaving, or when would that fit
Well,
into?
actually, now I'll start doing it before leaving. But, definitely after. Just to sidestep that. And so, we did the whole DNA testing thing in Park City. We just got the results back, actually.
Oh, shit.
So that was interesting. And what else? We just started working with a functional health guy who's actually very quickly, with like a couple of $100 tests, figured out, what's happening.
Huh.
There's some thing called MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone, which for both of us is like super low, which apparently indicates something. And we both tested fairly high for mold and a couple of other things. So it's like, this is one of those things where when we don't know what the root cause is, then we're trying 50 different things. But when we know actually exactly what's going on, then we don't need the 50 things. We can just do the one thing. And so I think from a supplement perspective, that's kind of a, like I can see, like even with the DNA one, they have an option for $160 a month. They'll create supplements custom to your DNA. So the stuff that you have some predisposition to. So that can, cut the volume of supplements pretty dramatically.
And I think that is right there, the parallel or the connection to, at least how I've observed you. I mean, we've known each other a little bit over, I don't know, a year and a half.
Yeah. We talked last Christmas, I remember. I was outside.
Yeah.
We had like a 2-hour... really deep conversation.
Yeah. I remember that. I know exactly where I was at. There was tears. There was...
Yeah.
it also as a related side note, anytime you can hop on a call with someone and go that deep, that quick, there's just, ever since I met you, man, there's just been a solid connection and getting to really observe and then spend more time with you. That piece of getting to the root, that piece of efficiency, that piece of when everything is in alignment, everything flows so much smoother. And, really where I want to go for today is because you've been no short of in a short amount of time, a huge mentor to me and teacher in creating, like, yes, on the business front for sure, but creating a life that kicks ass and also feels really good. And just for a bit of context, so now you've got quite a bit of education out there, online education, and you've got so many mini programs in your group, the Accelerator. But there was one that literally, and I told you this story, I didn't tell it to you till recently, but it's called the Dynamic Offer, and we'll unpack that, or I'd love for you to. But you sent me that, and you're like, hey, watch this for where you're at the end of the tears and all the things that we talked through and worked through, and you sent me that, and when I was watching, I was like, no fucking way. There is another way that doesn't feel so much like force, that actually, like, I believe I might sound weird to anybody listening, but I either went to tears or almost went to tears watching. It was a business fucking video, but it was just so dead on in alignment that I went down the path of, like, you have a Google Doc, which I don't even know how many pages.
Yeah.
But after that, I hand wrote your entire transcript of that video by hand. So I don't even know, like 14 at least single-spaced by hand pages.
Wow.
And that's how much it hit me that I really want to kinesthetically, like, feel it. Because mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever you want to say, I was like, there's something here. And it was such a, no exaggeration. It might sound like like a complete paradigm shift of what is possible for me, for my family, and how to do that. And So that's what I want to unpack today. And you've got, well, I'll pause there and let you chime because I just spoke a lot there.
Yeah, man, that's honestly like the exact reason why I'm so obsessed with what I do, because I really painstakingly, meticulously try to deliver those essentially like red pills
Yeah.
where, you know, the person still has the sovereignty to choose whether they want to take it or not. But if they choose to take it and they choose to fully open to it, then it opens the door to a completely different paradigm that we can exist in and from. And I think most people, they don't have a reference point for a paradigm that actually allows them to have it all.
Mm.
I mean, I certainly didn't. You know, I grew up super poor. I watched my dad work 3 jobs when I was a kid. You know, most of my life growing up, he, you know, come home at like 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m., sometimes 2 a.m. And he literally worked himself to death, right? And so I didn't really know that. First of all, I didn't even know that I was operating inside a paradigm, right? Because
you were in it.
I was in it. I was like a fish in water that doesn't know what water is, because for a fish to know what water is, the fish needs to know what's not water, right? We need contrast to make something distinct. And if we don't even know the thing we're in, and we don't have awareness of the fact that we're in the thing, then we don't even have the conception that there can be some other thing. And that's the deepest level of bondage that a human being can operate in. And so first I had to actually realize that there's other paradigms and the fact that I was in one, and that paradigm was limiting in terms of what I could experience in life. And most paradigms are, by definition, because most paradigms are optimized around one specific variable, right? So there's a paradigm where, you know, you work your ass off and, you know, trade your time and energy for money. And, you know, that can be considered a job, or someone who has a skill set, like they're a photographer, and, you know, I have a friend who's a freelance photographer, and, you know, that's a little bit above that level. So let me paint a framework, right? When we think about wealth, right? When we think about currencies, we have essentially the exchange that most people on the planet are engaged in is they're giving life force, right? They're giving their energy and they're giving their time, and they're exchanging it for a different currency. And that currency typically is money, right? And that's the default paradigm that most people on the planet operate inside of. But there's levels to the game, right? There's levels to wealth. And so that's level 1, which is I get paid for my time. And I get paid for my time, and that's an example of, you know, someone who works at McDonald's. Whatever the minimum wage is, let's say it's $15 an hour. You know, they trade an hour of their life and a bunch of life force and energy for whatever, $15, let's say. And that's the lowest level on the totem pole. And, you know, these people, society considers them unskilled labor, right? So their economic value comes from the volume of time that they can give. And so in colloquial speak, we call that trading time for money.
Right.
Right? Because it's like, I got nothing else, right? I'll show up at a construction site and, you know, I'll put in 6 hours, and, you know, the foreman at the end of the day just pulls out a wad of cash and he's like, okay, here you go. And when I use comparative language, I don't mean that it's less moral or less ethical or less, that anyone who is at a lower level has any less worth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We got to also, there's a lot of nuance in this conversation that I'll unpack, but worth is different from value. We all have infinite worth. And the mathematical proof for that is because we exist. And the universe that we exist inside of and that which we are is a perfect mathematical equation. And because the algorithm, the equation, the mathematical structure of the universe is perfect, because it has to be for all of this to exist in this way, the fact that your 40 trillion cells somehow, independent of your will, know to organize into your liver, into your heart and your kidneys, and somehow they know to work with each other, right? We can call that a miracle, right? And the same thing with the moon and the ocean and the birds and the trees and all of life itself. If someone has a penchant for the divine, we would call that a miracle, right? It's a miracle that we exist. It's a miracle that we're even having this conversation. And, I swing both ways on the science side and the spiritual side. So, because I don't think those are actually different things. I think it's the same thing. And so I call a miracle basically perfect mathematics. So miracles are basically mathematical perfection. And so every human being has infinite worth. Why? Because they exist and because there are no mistakes in the mathematics of the universe. And what that means is everything has a place. So if something exists, if you exist for a reason, right? And that is fundamentally what allows us to realize that there is a mathematical proof for our infinite worth. That's what allows us to realize that we belong, right? That we were created by God, universe, source, whatever, someone wants to categorize that as. There was it was not a mistake, right? We are not an aberration. We are here for a reason. We are a part of this symphony in this universe, this universe, this one verse.
One verse, one
right?
song.
Which is perfect. That is a mathematically perfect symphony made up of all of us, right? We're not just a wave in the ocean, we're the entire ocean in the wave. And so that is our worth. Our worth is infinite, right? You look at a baby in the eyes and it's pretty obvious. But our value is not, right? Our value is not equal and uniform because value comes from something else, right? And so that's why we have to disambiguate worth and value. And there's many kinds of value, but in this case, we're talking about economic value. And so in terms of economic value, then the lowest level of the ladder is I can produce value for someone else by giving my time and energy. I can get paid for my time. If I, spend 10 hours of my time, I'll get paid, a certain amount of money. Cool. The level up from there is I get paid for my skills. And so this is, my friend who's a photographer. Like after college, he, got into photography and he apprenticed with someone. He learned the skills of photography and videography. And then he started getting booked for weddings and, other things. And now he's making more because he developed a skill that increased his value. And that skill has a certain value in the marketplace based on supply and demand. And he was able to exchange his skills for the currency of money, right? And in most cases, it's a more favorable exchange rate, right? You can make more when you have a skill than if you don't have a skill and you're just giving your time. And so, he can work for less time, but make more money because he has more leverage, right? He's leveraging something else, which is the skill, right? We leverage assets. So him learning photography gives him, this asset. And so he doesn't have to trade as much of his time to make a certain amount of money. Great. So the next level up from there is I don't just have time, I don't just have skills, but I have the ability to manage and organize other people with skills or other people with time. So this is the manager of the McDonald's. This is the director of the software engineers, right? This is the foreman. He's not carrying the bricks up himself, but he's organizing, he's directing. And at this level, people get paid to organize, right? Paid to manage. And this is sort of the essence of the classical consulting company, right? Bunch of consultants, like consulting company will be like, okay, we have access to all of these people with all of these skills, and we're going to sell their skills, right? And we're going to make more money, and we'll pay them out, and, we'll get rich. Like McKinsey and Bain and all these companies.
These big, yep.
Right? Cool. So that's a level, right? Then things get actually really interesting. Because at this level, there is still a good amount of time involved, right? And if we want to have it all, we also want to have more of our time in our domain. We want to have ownership over our time, right? That is the only way we can be free and sovereign, when I don't have to ask someone what I can do with my time, right? So fundamentally, until then, I'm basically a slave because I don't have autonomy. And when I don't have autonomy, a lot of human suffering is downstream of that. Because then I don't have control over my life. And that creates anxiety, right? Then I have to numb that with alcohol and TV and social media and all these things to avoid the fact that I'm not free, which is a very painful reality to confront. So anyway, the next level from there becomes I can get actually paid to think. And this is when things get interesting, because now I'm actually decoupling from time. Because the thing that I'm trading is not my time or energy, but it's my ability to think, right? So Steve Jobs, he had this idea, what if I can put 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? And that generated hundreds of billions of dollars of economic value. The idea probably came in a second, in a moment, right? So that's where the beginning of asymmetry is, right? Asymmetry is something that I'm obsessed with more than almost anything else. Obsessed with a lot of things, but that's a big one. Where there is a disproportionate relationship between my inputs and my outputs, right? So even that workshop that you were talking about, like I wrote every word, it took me a while to do that, but then I could put it out and, hundreds of people have bought that and had some version of that experience, and it's allowed me to change a lot of lives. But I only created that once, right? So there's a disproportionate relationship between inputs and outputs. So in that workshop, I wasn't really getting paid for my time. I was getting paid to think, right? It took me decades to uncover these ideas and really build this philosophy on not just how we can build a business, what I call an economic engine around our energy, right? An architecture around who we are authentically, on the things that we're obsessed with naturally, on the ways in which we deeply desire and enjoy creating value, and how do I construct that in a way that allows me to get paid to exist?
Can I pause you right there?
Yeah.
Because that concept right there, getting paid to exist. I mean, you've given, I think, one of the hallmarks of any great, as you say, marketer, even coach, but is when you can articulate, or someone can articulate the other person's problems, challenges, experience, and put words to them even better than they could. And that piece of getting paid to exist, like, wait, let's just take a fucking moment right there and like breathe that in. When you had first said that and then unpack that, one, it made so much sense. And in part, there has been along the way, and I'm still super early, but there's been, some micro resistances because it's such a paradigm shift. Like, wait, is this fucking real? Is this possible?
Am I allowed to have this?
Am I allowed? Do I deserve it? Am
Yeah.
I allowed? I'm coming through that right now.
Yeah.
And the getting paid to exist, like one of the things, and please extrapolate on this, but one of the things that you had gave voice to was, and I've experienced this, not just seen it countless times in whether it's the self-development space and the fitness space, but there's a push to become a character. There's a push to become a different version of you on social media or on YouTube, to step into someone else and embody a persona. Now, maybe that works for comedians and such, but at least for the life that I personally want to live, I already know unconsciously there are so many masks that I wear and don't even fucking know, And so one of my goals has been, how can I live more embodied of who I authentically am in all areas? So the version of Mike that shows up at the retreat, the version of Mike sitting with you here, the version of Mike with my son or with my wife. Yeah, I do have a different relationship with everybody, and there's a different level of trust and safety and history. And so, yeah, it's not the same relationship with everybody, but in terms of the stepping into another persona to promote something, like, I don't want that personally. And so when you brought up this concept of getting paid to exist, that also to my nervous system, because you talk a lot about the nervous system in your work, to my nervous system immediately, boom, like immediately with bringing that possibility into my awareness and into my awareness, I was like, no fucking way. And so immediately I noticed stress going down, not because I started doing much different, but just because a whole new possibility of being in the world, of being with my family, of being in my business now opened up. So unpack that. Like, what does that mean? What could that look like, getting paid to exist?
Yeah. So great timing, because, the next level up from paid to think is actually getting paid to exist. And that's the highest level of leverage, right? That's the highest level of asymmetry, where there is no effort being expended. There is no energy being drained. There's no performance being created. There's no character being played.
Yeah.
There is no doing things as a means to an end. Like, if I do this thing, then, I'll make money or people will like me.
Then I can play, then I can...
Right?
Yeah.
It is a state of such deep presence and ease and authenticity that the person isn't just living in a flow state, but their entire existence becomes a state of flow, right? And all the hallmarks of flow apply. So the experience is autotelic, which means that I'm not doing the thing for some reward in the future. Like, people don't surf because, something will happen after they, come down from the wave, or ski or whatever. The experience is the reward. And that's only possible when there's a deep level of focus and a deep level of enjoyment and a deep level of aliveness and simultaneously a deep level of ease. So that is the most optimal state for a human being to exist in. We're fully absorbed in the experience, and we're operating in a state of play, and we're not accruing any strain doing the thing. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the only way to play this game of business, right? And play this game of life. And that place of radical authenticity is it's the only zero entropy state for a human being. Because everything else is a performance, right? Everything else is an attempt to manipulate one's environment towards a certain outcome. That can happen in a sales conversation. That can happen when creating content on social media. That can happen when making an offer. That can happen, in any domain of business, but also any domain of life, right? And what I realized was that for me to be not me is effortful. And when I am separated from myself and I don't know myself, which means I'm not clear on my values, my principles, the core philosophy that my life is built on, my ideals, my constraints, my boundaries, my wounding, my triggers, my shadow, my desires. When I don't know those things, then I don't know who I am. And if I don't know who I am, then I cannot construct the perfect economic engine around my energy. Because business is an amplification function on the person. So if we're operating in a state of radical coherence and resonance with ourselves and with our truth, and we're living in alignment with our design, we all incarnated for a reason, right? We picked the curriculum that we received growing up for a reason, because we're here to embody the opposite of that, and that becomes our work in the world. And, I love helping people become free because I, selected my curriculum to be the opposite of that. And that, when it's extruded, becomes the most beautiful way to exist because it is a natural extension of who we are. So this idea of getting paid to exist is, probably the chief obsession. And once someone begins to digest the paradigm, it just layers upon layers, right? Because we have to first understand who we are. We have to understand what we care about. We have to understand what turns us on, what lights us up, what we hate, what drains us. Because the perfect business is one that energizes us more than it drains us. The perfect relationship, the perfect marriage is one that energizes us more than it drains us. Conflict, for example, is a drain function. So when there's a lot of conflict in a relationship, one or both people will feel very drained. And when we look at biological systems in nature, when the organism is losing more energy to its environment than it's gaining, it will die. And eventually the species will go extinct. So anything that survives in nature, let alone thrives, figures out a way to gain more energy from its environment, then it loses energy to its environment. So in a simplistic way, that's the hyena that manages to, find enough scraps from the lion's hunting to feed it, and then is able to procreate and is able to feed its cubs, or whatever the name is for little hyenas. And then that species can propagate, right? But this is the architecture energetically for pretty much every complex adaptive system. We are complex adaptive systems. Our marriages and relationships are complex adaptive systems. Our businesses are complex adaptive systems. And we're made up of other complex adaptive systems, right? The biggest one being the universe itself. Because your liver is a complex adaptive system. It's complex because it behaves in a very non-simple way. It's got many sub-parts, and those sub-parts have a lot of relationships between each other. And those sub-components and the relationships between those sub-components creates a higher order of function. Right?
It's like a system of systems.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the cell is one level of complexity, but a collection of cells becomes a higher level, and so on. And then it's your liver. Now, liver is, orders of magnitude more complex than the individual cell, right? And then you keep going up, and it forms you. And then you keep going up, and it forms, all of humanity, and so on. So that's the complex part. The adaptive part is that it's never static. It's always in flux, right? It's always a moving target because it's a dynamic system, right? It's always reacting and being influenced by its environment. And it's a system because, as much as it looks like pure chaos, there is an implicate order to it. And for us to have any level of mastery over anything, first we have to derive the implicate order. So we have to first understand ourselves and understand what gives us energy and what drains us energy, right? What kind of vision fills us up and pulls us forward, and what kind of a vision for life or business actually causes our energy to drop and it feels like a slog and very effortful, very strenuous. And if we organize every aspect of life in a way that it gives us way more energy than it takes, then we become successful from an evolutionary perspective. And it's also something that feels mathematically very elegant. So that is sort of the mathematical way of understanding what having it all means, right? I wake up and I feel excited. I feel turned on. I have a ton of energy. I look at my wife and I feel so in love and I feel so grateful. And I thank God every day that we found each other. And when we spend time together, my heart just blooms open and I just feel so in love, right? And then when I begin to do work, quote unquote work, it feels like play, because the thing that I'm doing to generate an economic outcome is something that I would do even if I wasn't, it's just who I am, right? What I do is an extension of who I am. It gives me joy to do it. Like after a call, for the accelerator, I'm more turned on and I'm more lit up after, a few hours of that than before. And then, every other aspect of my life, like my health, my friendships, my relationships with family, my relationship with my immediate environment, all those things, like my relationship with money, my relationship with, all of these things, mathematically gives me way more energy than it takes from me. And when that equation is very meticulously constructed and it's very elegant in its construction, that experience is what I call having it all. Right? And like anything else, that is, I think, the ultimate masterpiece that any human being can take on the desire and responsibility to create and craft. And it's, I was in Florence this summer, and I saw the statue of David, and it's much bigger than I thought it would be. Huge, and it's extraordinary. And when Michelangelo was asked, like, how did you do this? Because what I didn't realize, by the way, with sculpting, because in the same hall there's other sculptures, some are half finished. First of all, what he said was, I just took away all the things that were not David. So perfection is actually a result of meticulous subtraction, not addition. And so when it comes to ourselves, what are we subtracting? Well, we're subtracting the untruths. We're subtracting the illusions. And, self-doubt and not feeling worthy and all this stuff, these are illusions. They're not real, right? It's a fabrication, it's a construction of the mind. And so he said, I saw the block of marble and I took away everything that was not David. Now, the crazy thing about that is that when you're subtracting from a block of marble, you cannot make a mistake. If you take too much away, you got to start over. Right? And that to me just illustrates the level of devotion it takes for a human being to construct a life that is so maximally in resonance with who they are. It's to construct, what I call an economic engine, think of it like a business, that is a perfect reflection of the stuff that they feel really excited, really turned on, really alive to do, that also feels like play. And to me, that's the most fun, worthwhile endeavor that we can select for ourselves. Because, what else are we doing? Right? Why settle? Why compromise? Because there's, people who are in crisis, and then there's people who are surviving. Then there's people who are, a little further ahead. Life feels average. Then there's people who create, they like, no, that's not enough. I want to create a good life. And then most people stop there. And then a few people say, no, I want a great life. Right? And again, we come back to value, right? Because value comes from doing something that is not easy. So when someone's fit and has, a lot of muscles, society kind of respects them, right?
Sure.
There's an almost immediate kind of respect that's given to them. And that happens because there is a knowing that that person held a certain amount of discomfort to achieve that physique. It's the same thing with successful entrepreneurs. Society respects them, most of society at least, depending on the entrepreneur, because there's a recognition that that person has the ability to hold discomfort. That person has the ability to delay gratification. That person has the ability to control their impulses. That person has the ability to live and operate from a much longer time horizon. Right? So the more, I don't mean that in a moral or any other qualification way, but the less money someone has, the smaller their time horizon. The more money someone has, the longer the time horizon. So the wealthiest people on the planet, they're thinking in, 400 or 500 year timeline, right? what they're thinking about is how do I preserve and multiply my capital so my great grandkids
Right.
benefit, right? And they have all of these entity structures and ways in which they protect their capital and build empires. The poorest people, their time frame is usually minutes, right? It's like, what am I going to do right now? And then you have the full spectrum in between. And there's, people who work jobs and make, let's say 6 figures a year. They operate in months, maybe years. Some of them think more long term, but those people usually end up becoming more financially successful and secure, right? Because they're thinking in the future. But most people, it's not that when we have less money, we operate on a shorter time frame, but it's because we operate on a shorter time frame that we have less money.
Interesting.
So broke people are broke not because they're only focused on the present, right? But it is, and this is another paradigm, by the way, right? Because time and money, these are some of the most misunderstood things in society, right? Everyone worships money and they devalue time. But when you think about it, the older you get, the less time there you have to live. So time is actually deflationary. As in the supply of time is steadily decreasing, right? So the value of time, so basic economics, supply and demand, when supply drops and demand stays the same, value has to go up, right?
Right.
So the value of time is actually steadily increasing the older we get as every moment passes. But when we think about money, like, first of all, we can't make money, right? So people, even in language, don't really understand money because we're not central banks. Where does money come from? Money comes from central banks, which are not central or banks. If you take the US, it's a private family-owned business that has been given the exclusive right to print money. The way money is printed, the way money is created is that they issue debt. That's why we live in a debt-based monetary system. So they create money by creating debt, right? So we're not central banks, so we can't make money. But central banks print money, right? So over 80% of all the money in circulation was printed in the last 5 years. So when central banks abuse their power and they keep printing money, that's called inflation. Inflation happens when the value of money goes down because, look, the supply now is doing the opposite of time. It's increasing exponentially, but the demand stays the same. So the value has to drop. And this happens in every, nation state. It's happening around the world. So the value of money is decreasing. The value of time is increasing. But most people are trading an appreciating asset for a depreciating, it's not even an asset, it's actually a currency.
Time.
Right? Money is currency. Time is actually the asset.
Time's okay.
Right? So when I think about this stuff, I actually, I trained myself to not think in terms of money, but think in terms of time. Because that is actually the thing that's most valuable. So it never made sense to me that, I give up all my time to make money. So Parkinson's law, if I don't create a constraint, then, let's say I'm open to working 12 hours a day, right? The work is going to take whatever space I give to it.
If you gave yourself 12 hours to do it, you would take 12 hours.
Right. It'd probably take me 15. Right. And the other thing I realized was that all value comes from constraints. So without constraints, there's no value. Right? We only value something when there is a sense of scarcity with it. So if we could live indefinitely, would we still appreciate the ordinary moments?
No.
Because like, I got all the time in the world.
Wow.
Right? I have till infinity. I'm immortal. So the value of any individual moments just plummets. Right? So when supply is infinite, value is zero. Right? So if I can, I used to live in New York, and, on the Lower East Side, in a 5-block radius, there's like 400 amazing restaurants and coffee shops and cafes. So if it's all around me, if it's, in abundant supply, I don't value it, right? It's like, it's just there. So all value gets created from constraints. But we fail to realize this, so we don't constrain our most valuable asset, which is time. So a core thing, I'm going to connect it back to getting paid to exist. We have to, if we want to get paid to exist, we have to operate from constraints. And, one of the constraints I like is working 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. Does that mean every week, as soon as I hit like 16 hours, I stop? No. But it's a guideline, right? So I think of, there's growth seasons and then there's maintenance seasons. Like this summer when we were in Europe, I was maintenance mode. And, my threshold was 5 to 6 hours a week. That's how much I'm working. Right now, I feel like I'm in a growth phase, and, I'm going to relax that constraint. But all value comes from constraints. So if we're willing to work as much as it's needed, we're actually sabotaging our ability to make the kind of money we want, because we're devaluing ourselves fundamentally. So when we constrain the supply of the thing, that constraint actually forces a level of creativity, right? And that forces a recalculation of value. The value we receive is equivalent to the value we hold ourselves in, right? Because reality is a mirror, it's a hologram. So the value that comes to us in the form of money is a perfect reflection of the value that we see in ourselves. And that's why, to come back to one of the things we start with, which is worth is different from value, right? Value comes from holding discomfort. Value comes from doing hard things. Because, if everyone was 6% body fat, tons of muscle mass, like perfect proportions, perfect physique, would we as a society value being fit? Probably not. No, everyone's fit. Like, what's the big deal? What's so special about you? But if no one's fit, or most people are obese, but there's a few people who meticulously craft their physique, right? We see them as valuable. But society sees them as valuable because they saw themselves as valuable enough to invest in themselves and create constraints. Maybe it was a constraint of, I'm not going to eat more than, 1,800 calories. Maybe it was a constraint that I'm going to have an hour every day minimum, or 90 minutes where I'm going to work out. So I got to figure out how to manage my life and so on, right? So in business, the entrepreneurs who actually, scale is a word I'll use, but most people also don't really understand that word because, it's relative. It's like, what are you scaling? The way most entrepreneurs think about scaling is just more.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm going to work more. I'm going to hire more people. I'm going to spend more on ads, right?
I mean, that's the exact thing that feels so out of alignment for me, because, I mean, to each their own, and I have almost no desire to have a large team, to, I would love and am loving growing into having the most lean, efficient, joy-filled line of my work/calling that allows me abundance of time, energy, freedom to serve the utmost people in the world and also serve myself and serve my family. I don't want inventory. I don't want fucking shipping labels. I don't want, teams or people following me around. That's just not the life that I want to live. And yet, when you look outside, the vast majority of what I've heard and what you're going to hear is largely like that's the way to do it. And so when I've heard, I didn't even think of it till really right now. Well, I don't know if I've got too much against the word scale, but I think what I've seen in that regard has left a bad taste in my mouth. Like, I don't want to do this just because I'm, quote, supposed to do it. And so what I've found, and in those ways, in some way, shape, or form, I've sabotaged it.
Yeah.
Or I've worked, because I'll work, right? My dad was an immigrant, like what was modeled. So like that comes easy. And I've always felt like this can't just be the only way.
Yeah.
Just because the vast majority of everyone that I see is doing it and on the surface celebrating it, it's not for me, or I don't want it to be. And so, continue.
Yeah. And so, first, that's a very astute observation that you see the sabotage pop up. Because when we are out of alignment and success in one area jeopardizes another area that we value, we will engage in sabotage, consciously or unconsciously. There was one founder I was working with, tech startup. They were doing well, they were growing, and he was fairly technical. So he, one of the paradigms he was living in, it was that he has to be really involved with support, because the business that they were running, it was one of those like high stakes technology companies where if something goes down, then clients are going to lose a lot of money and big problem. So his adaptive response to that pattern was, control. So he would sleep with his phone next to his head, on, with ringer on full volume.
Shit.
And Slack would be going off all night because they had, clients all around the world. And so first, obviously you can imagine what his sleep was like and what that did to his body, his health, his mental state, all those things. But it was becoming a huge issue in his marriage. And one of the things we identified early on was the subconscious contract. So when he came to me, they had been stuck at the same revenue level for, I think, 4 quarters. And he was really starting to question himself, if he had what it takes. Because, they'd done well, but he could see what the potential was for the business. And they weren't, they weren't even scratching the surface. And one of the early sort of epiphanies and insights he had was when I laid this all out, and I was like, so if this business blows up, if we 3x in the next year, are you still going to have a marriage? And he looks at me, he's like, I don't think so. I think my wife's going to leave me. So he was constraining the growth of the business because he was subconsciously trying to protect his marriage. That's why, coming back to complex adaptive systems, the business is not an isolated subsystem. It has to, the only way to succeed is to have it all, because if the business growing doesn't make your marriage better, you're doing it wrong.
Mm.
If the business growing comes at the cost of your health, you're doing it wrong. There was one founder I work with, we just closed a $26 million round with a private equity firm. He still owns a big chunk of the company. So he's going to eventually exit for like $400 or $500 million. But in the process, he ran himself into the ground, lost hearing in 1 year, like just from stress and just pushing his body. And, it's come at a cost. Right? And so I see this a lot, right? And I call this a lack of harmony or a lack of coherence across these systems. And so it's really not possible for any one part of their life to thrive when that part thriving basically jeopardizes a different part, right? And so when we think about scale, most people misunderstand scale because what they actually mean is growth, right? Because growth comes via addition, but scale actually comes from subtraction. At least the way I define it, right? Growth is indiscriminate. Like, I'm just going to double the amount of leads coming in, and we're going to grow.
Right.
Right? I'm going to hire more salespeople, and we're going to grow. The problem is growth requires a greater amount of entropy to be digested and a higher level of organization and order to be created for it to be sustainable. That usually ends up falling on the founder. If you have a solo or one-person business or a relatively small business, it's basically going to be on you, right? And it's going to be held by your nervous system. And most people, what happens is when they try to grow or they try to grow really fast, they cannot digest the growth. So the faster they grow, the faster they drop back, sometimes below where they were in the first place. So 67% of the companies who end up on the Inc. 500 within 2 years have either shrunk dramatically or have gone out of business.
No way.
Yeah. So because most people actually cannot handle that kind of growth.
Wow.
So the way I, think about engineering exponential growth in a business is actually through subtraction. Because subtraction is actually the only exponential function. Right? Subtraction is multiplicative. So if I can take the same business and I can remove things, maybe it's instead of marketing across 5 channels, we're only focusing on 1 channel. Instead of serving these 5 different sub-avatars, we're only going to focus on this one avatar, right? Instead of competing with this half a dozen set of products, we're actually going to just pick the one that drives the most value, that we can charge the most for, right? So it's actually a creative mathematical problem versus how most people approach it, which is, I want more, so I'm going to do more, right? I'm going to hire more. I'm going to spend more. The issue with all of that is that it's just not sustainable.
Right.
And to me, if it's not sustainable, then it's actually not scalable because it's just temporary, right? The biggest gains in business come long tail. It's compounding. When someone's in the game for 10 years, they're going to win, right? They just have to stay in the game long enough.
Right.
So speed and sustainability in business are actually inversely related. Most people optimize for speed because that's what the ego wants. Because they're trying to outrun their self-judgment and self-criticism. But if they actually optimize for sustainability, they'll actually make way more money, have a much better time doing it, and the business will actually grow in harmony with all the other aspects of their life. And, we can think about this in terms of floors and ceilings, right? Most people are focused on raising the ceiling, which is, last month was my biggest month. And, let's say I make 100 grand last month. The ego says, okay, we got to do 150 this month. Then the following month, it's like, oh, okay, we got to do 200, right? Because we got to keep going. So most people, they try to raise their ceiling. But actually, if we focus on sustainability, what we want to do is raise our floor, which is, okay, in the last 12 months, our worst month was, let's say, 18K. We had an 18K month, we had a 22K month, and there were a few 50 and 60K months. Like this year, can we just raise our floor to 30K? What would it take for our new floor to be 30K? What's the hygiene? What are the systems? Like, what are the, places we can gain efficiency? How do I raise the floor? Because maximum achievability is not the same as maximum maintainability. So if I keep trying to hit top speed and keep trying to, outdo the top speed every next month, what happens is that I'm not going to be able to sustain that. And I'm putting myself at a much greater risk for a crash. And now the caveat to all this is like some speed is a useful variable in certain kinds of businesses. Like if you've raised, $50 million from VC, you got a big war chest, there's a tight window of opportunity in a market. Actually, the intelligent thing is to go for it and just, buy growth at all costs. Now, that's not true for most people, right? Like especially on the expertise-based service business side, like most businesses are never going to exit. And so when people who are building or running or growing a business that's not designed to be exitable, follow the strategies, the rhetoric, and the scaling paradigms from people who run very different kinds of businesses, have very different goals, there's usually a mismatch, and it takes them in the opposite direction of everything that they actually value. Right? And that's how you end up with the person who's like, oh, why are you working so hard? So I can spend time with my kid. How much time are you actually spending with your kid? Barely any. Right? Because there's no constraint. Now, if that person actually got honest, they were like, okay, what are my values? Time with my kid, time with my wife. Like, I want to really enjoy what I'm doing. And they reorganized their business so that they could actually serve and be in harmony with the values that they hold every single day. They'll actually get way more energy and way more motivation and way more juice and excitement and passion that in the smaller amount of time that they allow themselves, they're actually going to be way more effective. They'll think way more creatively. And in most cases, they will actually outperform the version of themselves who's willing to sacrifice everything for scale, which is, there's that word again.
There was something that you said around, and I'd love to take it here. You had to learn to train yourself. You said those specific words. Now, for me, that language really vibes.
Yeah.
Like that's just how my mind works. That's my background. I would imagine a lot of guys too. Like the training aspect is something I can really grasp. And largely what I'm hearing is what you trained yourself, and what I've experienced from you as well from personal experience, but what you train people on is how to think. Like that's what you're really training.
Yeah.
And that piece of the constraint, because even now, like, and I've done a little bit of this, but I've done it as in terms of creating boundaries in work, for example.
Yeah.
Like unless it's a special case or special example, I do my fucking best. Like 5:30 is like cutoff time PM. dinner with the family, unless it's a special thing, weekends too, unless it's, I'm traveling these 3 weeks, so it's a bit off. But that, I mean, we've had a conversation. My income has only increased. My income has only increased. Paradoxically, I'm still working a fair bit, but paradoxically, the less that I'm working. And so the challenge that I want to give, or the invitation challenge, whatever you want to say, that I want to give myself is like, what if I really set a cap, like 10 to 4, 6 hours?
Yeah.
What could happen? Like, what would I need to, how creative would I get? When we do movement stuff, especially when I would work with kids, it would create constraints. So like, imagine it's a crawling thing. Okay, everyone's crawling on all fours. We're going to this thing. But then I'd throw out, okay, you can only crawl with one hand. So 2 feet, one hand. And normally you would think they would be more limited, but where you would see them go in their creativity and what they would unlock and you'd be like, whoa. So that piece on constraint, because I would love now as we talk about, what is the actionable thing in terms of, just even this being in someone's awareness, I think hopefully will be paradigm shifting. But how does someone start training themselves to start thinking in this way?
Yeah. I think movement's a really great parallel there, because, even a very simple activity like doing movement exploration, where let's say one hand and 2 feet have to be touching the ground, and you're trying to figure out how you can move through space. The thing that happens in that situation is that actually neurologically we fully engage, because in an unconstrained scenario, the brain actually does not need to work, doesn't need to be on. It's on autopilot, right? There's a certain anatomical comfort in the absence of constraint. So it gets lazy, right? And so we basically get to dissociate and not be present in the absence of constraints. And in business, what that means is we actually don't make good decisions, right? Because the job of a CEO is, I think of it actually more like CAO, which is Chief Allocation Officer, because the job of a CEO is to allocate time, energy, money, and attention. Those are the 4 currencies, to activities that produce, hopefully, a much greater return on that investment, right? So we're always facing this problem of how do I allocate finite resources for, hopefully, an infinite return or a near infinite return. Because the way I think about this, scaling is basically going from, I put 10 units of energy and time. Let's say use a composite. I put 10 units of resources and I get 50 units back. Let's say that's what happened this year. Next year, I want to put 10 units in and get 100 units back. Right? So what we're actually looking for is a greater return on our investment of resources. The way we allocate resources is by making decisions. So the results we experience in business are directly proportional to the quality of our decision making. Right? So how much money I make and how stressful it is and how it feels and what I have to give up in exchange is a direct function of the decisions I'm making in terms of allocating my finite resources. right? So if I actually become better at resource allocation, then I have an opportunity, because my resources are finite, right? I only have 24 hours a day. And I don't think anyone's working 24 hours a day every single day, right? And so my time is finite. I have finite energy because there's only so much juice I have. Even if I eat more food and inject myself with NAD every 5 minutes, still only a certain amount of energy I have, right? And there's a certain amount of attention I have, because if I can focus, let's say 5 hours at a stretch, but eventually I'm going to get fatigued. Now I can augment my resources by buying more resources. Like I can hire someone. Now I have their energy to allocate. That's what having a team is. But a team is just an amplification of the founder for all these reasons. So resources are finite, right? But the optionality I have in terms of what are the things I can allocate those resources towards is infinite. Because I can do literally anything. I could spend all of today making TikTok videos, or I could send an email to my list, or I could build an asset like a lead magnet or some sort of, customer acquisition offer. Like I can do whatever I want with my time. I can also choose to, not do anything and just scroll social media. So I have infinite optionality, right? But I have finite resources. So I have to get better at allocating those resources. And when I do that, then I see an increase in the energy that I'm getting back from my environment, which is people paying me money, people having goodwill towards my brand, right? There could be testimonials and reviews and referrals, retention, right? So that's the fundamental game. Now, to play that game, I have to constrain my inputs. Because when I constrain my inputs, let's say I'm used to working 10 hours a day, and I hear this episode, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to only work 5 hours a day. Now, I have to figure out how to get the same return or a better return for those 5 hours, which means that I'm probably going to choose different things to work on. Things that are higher leverage, right? Things that give me a much bigger return, ideally an exponential return, because not every task is created equal. Some things you can think of as like $10 an hour tasks. Some are $100 an hour. Some are $1,000 an hour. But there are things that are $10,000 an hour task, right? So if I focus on the metric of my effective hourly rate, which is for every hour, how much money am I making? Which, like, you just divide the total amount of money you make by the total amount of hours you work in that time. You get your effective hourly rate. And if I just focus on increasing that, to increase that, I'm going to have to get more discerning and exercise better judgment at what I'm working on, right? So by changing what I'm working on, I can get a much better return on a smaller unit of time. And this brings me to the other big thing that I think could be useful for people. If you're listening to this, you are an entrepreneur, you want to make more money. I'm going to say something that's going to sound really weird. Don't try to make more money. It's actually pretty stupid to try and make more money. And I'll explain why. And I'm being provocative deliberately. It's actually way more useful and intelligent to increase the velocity of money versus increase the volume of money. So the way most people approach this is, okay, let's say I make $200,000 a year, right? And next year I want to make more. Let's say I want to make $400,000 a year. So this person is going to be like, okay, this is what my business looks like now. This is how much money I made. This is what I'm doing. How do I go from $200,000 to $400,000 a year? Right? That frame is going to inform their thinking and their decision making and their execution, right? Naturally, to go from 200 to 400, do you think their mind is going to think about, well, what else can I do? Like,
Absolutely.
what else should I do? Like, what are there things that, I can sell that I'm currently not selling? Like, are there parts of my audience I'm not monetizing? Like, it's really like, what more can I do?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
That's how I go from 200 to 400.
Yep.
What I teach is, don't try to go from 200 to 400 between this year and next year. See if you can make the same 200 in half the time. Right? So instead of next year,
Sure.
the goal is, how do I make 400K this year? It's actually, how do I make 200K in 6 months? So first of all, if someone's already made 200K in a year, their psychological relationship with that number is very normalized.
Right.
Right? They are someone who makes 200K. So tangent on this is, people who make $1 million a year make $1 million a year because they're people who make $1 million a year. Right? An athlete is an athlete because their identity is that of an athlete. Right? We do what we are. It's most natural for us to do what we are. So if someone's already making 200K, their system is fully congruent with making 200K.
Yep.
It's much easier to ask the question, okay, how do I make 200K in half the time? And that's another constraint, right? That also forces a recomputation in the system and forces a level of creativity. Because now to figure out like, okay, how do I do this and how do I make the same money in half the time? And if someone cracks that, then what's going to happen is they're going to make 400K next year. But they'll have gone about it in a totally different way, right? And these are just a couple of examples of how, most people, they don't really hit their goals, or hitting their goals come at a huge cost because of the way they think, right? Because of the way they approach and construct their reality. And, I don't know who said this, but the quality of our life is directly proportional to the quality of questions we ask, right? And so most people are struggling or not living the life they want because they're not asking the right questions. And the challenge with this is that when we don't even know that we're not asking the right question, we have no way of asking the right question, right? Because again, going full circle, the first step is awareness of self. Like, I have to actually know where I am. I have to locate where I am, which requires me to be brutally honest with myself. And most people can't be brutally honest because they're afraid of their own judgment. Right? So they avoid the truth. They literally don't make eye contact with themselves in the mirror. So they're distancing from themselves. And that, really compromises their ability to actually create the outcomes that they want. And the solution to this is one of my other principles, which is truth is love. And a corollary to that, which is anything that can be destroyed by the truth must be. So my salvation, my freedom, my sovereignty lies in my ability to confront the truth as directly as possible, as unflinchingly as possible, which is only possible when I'm not bracing for my own judgment. So I have to be so clean in my energy with myself, in my relationship to myself, that I can be with truth as much as possible, because that's how the system gets feedback from itself. And then when we get that feedback, we can actually iterate on how we're thinking and what we're doing and what paradigm we're operating in. And then we can test something else. And then that'll generate some feedback. And then the system learns and gets better over time. Because learning is not consuming information. Learning in my world is different behavior. Same stimulus, different response. Most people are just looping, right? But they want a different outcome.
Consuming information, yet their life doesn't look any different.
Exactly. Or, they're doing, because human beings are very mimetic. So it's like, I go on YouTube and, what is this person saying I should do based on what they did? Like, if we adopt someone else's thinking instead of thinking critically for ourselves, then, we're warping and distorting the signal. Because what source are we plugging into? Right? Is it the dude with the tank top and big biceps on YouTube? Or am I plugging into my wisdom, my intuition, my inner knowing? Right? Like, I can't build my masterpiece when I'm connected to someone else's source. Right? Because I want my business to feel like a custom fit suit that's made of sweatband material. Right? That's what being paid to exist means. Like, I'm fully at ease and I'm fully alive. Right? And so we don't put constraints because we're trying to avoid working, but we put constraints because efficiency is love. If I truly love myself, I will maximize joy in my life. If I truly love myself, I will spend as much time as I can doing the thing that makes me feel the most alive. If I truly love myself, then I will be as potent as possible with the finite resources I have. Like, I'm not going to be wasteful, right? I'm not going to take myself for granted. And that's why all economic value we create on the outside comes from how much value we ascribe to ourselves on the inside. If I see myself as valuable, if I see my own value, then I will make the decisions. I'll hold the beliefs. I'll have the thoughts. I'll take the actions that will then cause that value to be reflected back to me from the world. Right? And all of this works because the universe is a perfect mathematical equation. And that's actually where, it's both good news and bad news, because the bad news is, like, I have to, if every single thing that happens in my reality is my creation, I'm in agreement with that, I'm in a contract around that, then yeah, it's kind of all on me. But it also gives me the power and the agency to create whatever life I want. So it's the joke about entrepreneurship. Like, the best thing about entrepreneurship is that you're your own boss. The worst thing about entrepreneurship is that you're your own boss.
Wow, brother. My goodness. Yeah, I almost got emotional there, that last piece. Yeah, that really hits.
That's why, I named the business Scale with Psychology.
Right.
The kind of tagline is scale with your mind, not with your time. And this whole thing is a way to dog food the ultimate medicine, which is to fall in love with yourself. Right? Because that's the source of all of it. Because only when we truly love ourselves and we feel truly connected to ourselves, when we truly see our value, right? When we truly feel this devotional responsibility for our own well-being, for our own health, for our own ease, would we even dare to conceive a life that feels as good? Right? Because human beings, and entrepreneurs in particular, have a much greater capacity for pain than they do for pleasure. Right? Their tolerance for goodness is extremely limited. Because all of us felt very constrained and didn't feel free when we were young. That's why you ask any entrepreneur, what's your number one value? Everyone says freedom. Who seeks freedom?
people who felt the opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? Those well-adjusted people, they're not, they're not entrepreneurs who are like operating, in this tight grip.
Mm.
So the only chance we have is to dissolve all the illusions that keep us from recognizing the miracle that we are and falling in love with ourselves over and over and over and over and over again. Right? And I can say this because the first time I tried to kill myself, I was 6 years old. Right? Did not want to be here. And I had to know that. I had to hold the opposite of that to hold this. Right? And our greatest adversity becomes the seed of our greatest triumph, of our work in the world. Right? So I think this is by far the greatest gift we can give ourselves. Because entrepreneurship is just, how if you want to give a dog some medicine, you put it in peanut butter.
Yep.
So entrepreneurship is the greatest journey towards self-love and enlightenment, because it basically puts, everything right in front of our face, often in a really visceral and tangible way. And if we choose to engage with that material, then, so much opens up. But if we build a great business and make a ton of money, and we judge ourselves, we shame ourselves, we feel separated from ourselves, we are critical with ourselves, we're not enjoying ourselves, like, what's the point? Money, I was going to say money is just going to amplify that, right?
It's an amplifier of what's already inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a it's a Instagram cliche, but it's really true. Because I've worked with people, like one of my clients, his business does $350 million a year, right? I have a few who work with billionaires, like, people with so much money that the average person cannot even comprehend that level of wealth. And man, money really is an amplifier, because when someone has that much money and on the inside they still don't really like themselves, they can't really be with themselves without numbing, coping, distracting, avoiding. It really sucks, because for pretty much the whole population, everyone thinks like, if I have a ton of money, most of my problems would go away. And it's true, money solves a lot of problems, right? It makes life much easier. But when we still haven't addressed a lot of the internal stuff, then it's really visceral, because it's like, shit, money was supposed to fix all this. It didn't. What do I do now? And that's usually a very, pivotal moment for someone.
And usually they've spent, again, going back to the mindset of things, they've spent their whole life killing themselves.
Yeah.
And then the time goes way down, gets much more valuable. But then literally they make all the money, but then usually they get sick.
Yeah.
Or they've already lost the marriage.
Yeah.
Or their kids are already 22 years old and out of the house and they can't really even enjoy them. So it's a fucking mindfuck there. So it's an amplifier of that. But then also, if that's where the North Star only is at all costs, and that mindset, if I kill myself and then I'll finally be able to relax, or it just doesn't, I haven't met really, money. Yeah, I would agree. Money does solve a lot of problems. However, that mindset is really what I think is diminishing the sustainability, to your point, and the quality of life that we say that we're doing it for.
Right.
Now, this is, I'd love for you to talk about, this is what you teach, this is what you do, and to also see you, I didn't know you before a year ago, but I know you've dabbled over the years in, relationship coaching, and you've got still some of that involved, but to really see you in your line of genius, like the calls that you run are usually 90 minutes to 2 hours. Sometimes they go way longer, and I say that just because to see you lit up, like it's a fucking experience when you show up. And even this, truly, I do believe like this podcast is a really great, not only representation of the philosophy, it is the philosophy you teach.
Yeah.
And there's so much to that. But to feel you showing up for the group in the way that you do is also inspiring to me. So what is it that you do from, for someone who wants to learn more? Where can they find you? All that sort of stuff. Because this is, if this is landing, any of this, like I'm looking at the mic right now, if that's you listening, keep listening and re-listen to this. I've watched that offer video maybe 5 times at least, and then hand wrote the whole thing because it landed at such a deep level, because it's not just going back. It's not just business. There's no separation, or at least the life that it's an illusion to think that there is. So when all the boats rise, even when I was competing, I'll keep this quick, but when I was competing, especially at the end there, part of the main reason why I competed was because through a holistic philosophy, when I was competing or training, because there was no separation everywhere else, at least at the level of awareness that I had at that time, I also knew that the way I was going to have to love myself was going to also need to up level. Where I invested my time, energy, and money, the types of relationships that I said yes to, the types of relationships I said no to, my level of spiritual development, my level of, relational, emotional depth and capacity, I knew that if in the way that I wanted to do it, that all boats would rise. That's honestly what, maybe I could say, what excited me more, actually much more, than actually winning. Like I want to win for sure. I want to see what I'm capable of, what my potential is. And I also want not only myself at all levels to rise, but I also want the people around me to do that too. So long way of saying, what are you up to? Where can people find you? And yeah.
Yeah. So the thing I love the most is helping people scale their businesses and build these economic engines around who they are that allow them to get paid to exist. And it's the most interesting, multidimensional, fascinating thing for me. And, it doesn't feel like work. It's not a thing I do. It's who I am. And it's really a privilege for me to be in this space with people like you who are, crafting their masterpiece and who are not willing to settle for just a great business that makes great money, who want to have it all, who are looking for mathematical perfection at every level, every piece, every part, every component of their life. Total integration, total flow. And yeah, that's what I was put on the planet to do. So if someone vibes with all this, then yeah, come find me.
I love it, man. Thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for being a brother. I'm so excited for where we're all going and everybody listening too. So you're in this with us. So Ani, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you very much.
It's an honor. Thank you.